All right. Well, let's start, if we could, by just kind of going over whether it's chapter or lesson, pardon me. I hate that they call them lesson. Anyway, lessons 10 and 11. Were there any particular numbers or solutions or whatever that you found tricky or that are worth kind of walking back through? Or ones that I potentially had a typo on, because that happens too sometimes. I caught myself with one of them. Oh, she's gone. Maybe she'll come back and it'll work. Anything, Lucas, come to mind?
No, I didn't have anything.
That's totally okay. I just realized I failed to take a picture. Let's see if she comes back in. Try this again. She's going to rejoin. All right. Well, let me do this then. So going into tonight's lesson, or today's lesson 12, I'll kind of zoom out a little bit, and we'll talk about first just kind of where we've been, and then that'll allow us always to move forward to where we are. I always find, or almost always find, that the key to moving forward is making sure you know where in the world, in theory at least, where you've been. So we'll kind of go backwards a little bit, and we're going to talk about verbs. That'll be the big so what of today. So first, the idea is always kind of defining, what is a verb? And so kind of in its essence, a verb could be two things, or could communicate, let's say, would be a word symbol to communicate two things. Can you give me one of the two?
The specific thing being done, like the action.
Okay, good. So one would be the action. Let's see if that'll let her in. She's trying. So the first would be an action. Hey, Alicia! Glad it worked. Oh, I think our audio is connecting. Here she comes. Hey, Alicia.
Hey, guys.
Welcome, welcome. Awesome. We are just going backwards to verbs, but we can come back to the homework in just a second. So verbs, we're doing a little review, and then we can look at if you had any specific questions on the homework. But verbs are word symbols that are used to either communicate action or a state of being. Oops, that T is being difficult. State of being. So for an action, right, that could be anything you do. And that's actually what the word action means. It comes from a Latin word that just means I do. So for example, I run, I see, whatever, anything you can do. Versus a state of being would be something like I am, I exist, I become. Those would be not something that you, do, right? You're not acting, you just are existing, you just are. And so those are kind of the two major categories of verbs. So that's the part of speech. The part of speech, right, there are 8 parts of speech, and those are the building blocks of everything. So like noun, pronoun, adjective, conjunction, interjection, verb. Oops, as I make my verb like an A. Okay, verb, adverb, and last but not least, oh no, sorry, 2 more. I'm off. Let's see, interjection, conjunction. What am I missing here? Adjective. I'm missing 2. Oh, this is usually I always forget 1, and now I'm forgetting 2. This is great. The article, adjective. No, in the beginning. Oh, preposition. There we go. I just start saying sentences in English, and that makes me remember them. Preposition and adjective, adverb, preposition, interjection, conjunctions, noun, pronoun. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Noun, pronoun, adjective. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, that is all 8. Oh, okay. That was right in my initial count. Okay, golly, I got really nervous there. Okay, so I almost always forget one. That's kind of my joke to myself is I don't know what it is, but one of them I always leave out. So that's our part of speech. So when we talk about a verb, and this is just kind of a freebie, there are other like sub parts of speech called verbals. So like, for example, a participle is a verbal. It's a verbal adjective. So, for example, the running man or the, the walking dog, or the blowing wind, or whatever it is. So it's built off of a verb, run, for example, but it modifies a noun, the running man, something like that. So there are other subparts of speech, but they're all kind of built off of these like big parts. So anyway, so with verbs, we've got 5 different things, 7 total we'll see, but tense, voice, mood, person, number, and root and translation. So when we talk about a verb, these are kind of the maximum, at least in Greek. In Hebrew, for example, actually you would add like gender, like third person feminine singular, or third person masculine singular. So some languages will like gender code their verbs even, which is kind of cool. It just means you can see what gender the subject is. Greek doesn't do that. Latin doesn't do that. English doesn't do that. But anyway, so these are in Greek, these are the 7 total things that we could know. So tense talks about 2 things: when it happens and how it happens. So, right, we have our present tense, but that could be a simple present, I run, or what we would call a present progressive in English, I am running. And so those express 2 different kinds of, they're both being done now, the time of the verb, but how they're being done, or sometimes called the aspect, how they're being done was like a simple I run or a progressive I am running. And we kind of saw that with the imperfect, right? When was it happening? Well, it was happening in the past tense, right? So like if this is now, the imperfect would happen before now, but it would be happening in this progressive kind of way. I was running, or I used to run. So this kind of happening again and again and again kind of thing. So when, in the past, before now, how, either this imperfect, not complete, or this repeated habitual kind of action called an iterative. Okay. All right. Voice. So Greek has 3 voices. And does anybody remember what the definition is of voice? And then, or you could do it in either order, or what are the 3 options for a verb's voice? So we would like have a present blank or an imperfect blank.
So we had passive or active.
Good. And there's one more.
Stative.
No, although that's good that you said that. So stative is kind of in its own thing, which that kind of leads us to the definition of what voice is. Did you have the third one, Alicia? Middle, good. Okay, so let's do this. So we've got now, we could do this again either way. We can now define what active, middle, and passive are, or we could say, well, what is voice about? What are we actually talking about when we talk about the voice?
The relationship of the subject to the action of the verb.
Okay, awesome. So it's all about the subject's relationship to the verb. So subject and the verb is what we're talking about. And we're talking about action verbs by definition. That was kind of your point, Lucas, is we're always talking about verbs of doing something. Again, we'll just use one. I'll use kick. I like ones that are very like easily visible in our minds, right? So if the subject does the kicking, for example, I kick, the subject does the verb, I kick. What is that?
Active.
That's active. Good. So again, our definition can be the subject is acting, that's active. The subject does the verb, or the subject acts. That's great. Okay. But then we could have, instead of the subject kicking, right, I kick, we could have I am kicked. The subject is kicked. The subject is receiving the action of the verb. And what's that?
Passive.
Passive, yep. So the subject is acted upon. Oh, I'm going to run out of room, shocker. Okay. And then we have the middle option. So I kick myself. I, act upon myself. The subject acts upon himself. And that would be our middle, of course. So the subject acts, acts for or upon himself. Like I, I sharpened my own pencil. That kind of an idea. That's getting a little past it. That's more of like a Spanish kind of thing. But anyway, the subject acts upon or for itself. So I look at myself. I let myself out. Like I'll see myself out. That kind of an idea. That's almost like a middle kind of a thing going on. Okay. So our tenses have been the present and the imperfect. Our voices, we've seen active endings. So for example, right, if we saw like luo, present active indicative, versus luamen. Luamen. There we go. Present middle passive ending. So we saw, and this is what's going to come up tonight. So we saw they're both building on this kind of root stem of lu, and then they're adding an ending. So again, root stem of lu, and then we're adding an ending. Or when we went to the imperfect kind of added another kind of twist into this thing. So these were our presents. What did the imperfect add to this? Not just stem and ending. How do we know it was imperfect?
It was an augment.
Good. So here's one, for example. This is, actually, this one's a little tricky to see. So let's grab one that's maybe not so tricky. Okay, here's one. So with our word, didasco, here we have didaske. Didaske. So we see our augment on the front of our stem with an ending. So we still see our stem plus our ending, but here with the imperfect, what we saw is actually the way it was formed was we had an augment, plus stem plus ending, right? So now we've kind of upped the ante, so to speak, not just stem plus ending, but this epsilon, which now I'll go up to number one. We have a verb aperkatai, which is from aperkomai. So this is what can be tricky. So if we had an augment here, it would, another place that it would end up is between the apa plus the erkomai. But this would have then been lengthened. So it'd be an epsilon plus an epsilon would equal like an eta. That's what we see in, for example, right here, amelete. So it's, this one's kind of a weird spelling thing that happens. But anyway, there it could get added up front. It could get added, here's one, sunagon comes from sunugo. So sunugo, this alpha gets added to an epsilon, and when you add the alpha plus the epsilon, you get this eta, okay? So we had this prefix sun with ugo, sunugo, plus the augment, which could come right there in the middle, and that gave us the imperfect. So we have to have eyes. We have to kind of, peel our eyes to go, okay, I can't just be looking like I could in the present where I had to look for just stem plus ending. Like, for example, aperketai. That's what that one is. It's just a stem plus an ending. Aperkomai, now it becomes aperketai. Okay, my side tie. Okay, good. So that's a present, middle passive, indicative, third person singular. And I could see that just on my ending. What the imperfect added was, okay, now I have to be on the lookout for this augment. Oh, there's one right there. So not apothnesco, which is what it was, apothnesco, but apethnesco. So we've added this omicron plus an epsilon, and we got the epsilon, okay? So we have the out front option, we have the between the, between the prefix and the verb root. And then I was going to see if we had a really good one here. I don't think we have one. Amelon's kind of an example of that, but it's not quite what I wanted. So let me see if I can find one where you actually have one up front. Let's see here. Yeah, so here's another one of these weird spelling ones that we just have to be. This comes from fellow, and fellow, instead of having an epsilon, FLN, it takes an eta, but that's not because of good like math that kind of makes like a augment math, so to speak. Here's unabino, una becoming una. Here's katabino becoming kata. Oh, here's one. Okay, so we have iro. That's what our verb was. We had iro, and then we added to our diphthong alpha iota, I, we added an epsilon, and that again gave us an eta. Eta with an iota subscript. So that kind of makes sense. Like, oh, you've got a diphthong already, plus another, epsilon. Oh, okay, that's what we got. So those were the three options for our augment this last chapter. So we have to be on the lookout, not just for kind of stem and ending question. We also have to be on the lookout for, wait a second, it could also have this, augment thing going on up front. So for example, Eloan. So now I've got my stem, I've got my ending, and I've got my augment. Okay, so that would be our imperfect, and that's going to set us up. We'll see for what we're going to look at tonight. Okay. Pardon me. So far, all of our verbs have been, for example, if it was like present, active. What was that third thing? Do you remember that we would say when we parsed?
Indicative.
Indicative, yeah, and that just means not an imperative and kind of not wobbly is the way I'll put it. That's kind of the essence of the subjunctive. So we don't really have to worry about what that means in this moment, but if we just think of the simple difference between like I go versus go, or you go versus go, that's really the essence of the indicative. It just kind of says this is what's real, or this is what's happening. All right, and the last two things, besides the written translation thing, the person and the number, right? So our persons, we had three. We had first person, second person, and third person. And then number, it was just whether do we have one person doing it, singular, or do we have multiple people doing it, plural. And again, so luo would have been parsed present, active, indicative, first person, singular. And the last thing is from luo, meaning I destroy or I loosen. All right. Now, before we get on to lesson 12, let me give just a moment here. Alicia, do you have any specific questions from the homework from the either chapter or lesson, 10 or 11? No?
No.
Okay, good deal. Does it seem to kind of come together and make sense all right-ish?
I did not get to the homework for either lesson, so.
Okay. Well, check it out. I mean, I would say one thing that struck me as I was in church, I didn't take a picture of it, but one thing that struck me, even just in our most recent sermon, I was just kind of flipping through, we were in Luke's gospel, but I flipped over to John because something just kind of reminded me of John. And it struck me that if you go to the beginning of John's gospel, actually, let me just pull it up here. If you go to the beginning of John's gospel, you'll see so many of these imperfects. So let me just pull it up here for fun. Because these are you're at that point where, especially when it comes to like John, for example, this font may throw you a little bit, but I think we'll be all right. Okay. So for example, and again, sorry about the font thing, NRK ain. So in our recitation, we say that amen ace ain, amen eta ason. Those are the imperfect indicatives of sum, of sum, that's Latin, of ami, that's Greek. There we go, different linking verb. And so this whole first handful of verses, we've got all these forms, imperfect indicative. Here's another one, ain, hutas ain, and arche plus tanteon, panta diatu agenata. There's another imperfect. Oh no, sorry, that's an aorist actually. We're going to talk about that in 2 lessons. There's another aorist, and ain, sorry, I was like, there's more of them. Ain, and let's see, fine. Fine, this is from fino. Fino, fines, fine, present active indicative, third person singular, to shine. Okay, so katia, ata, kata, katelaben. Ooh, This comes from katalabano, but it was a kata, and now it's became a kate. So you actually have this augment thing going on right there. So this is actually a different past tense called the aorist. We're not there yet. We don't have to worry about it. But a lot of those skills, as far as, for example, even if maybe you saw en arche, or here later we had en auto in him, zoe ein, in him was life, kai he zoe ein, and the life was ta phos, photographia, light writing is actually what photographo means. Ton anthropon, the light. You translate that one. The life was the light. Nice predicate nominative. Ton anthropon.
Of the man.
Yeah, a genitive of men. Yeah, or of mankind or of humankind. So a lot of little things that maybe we'd see. I'm going to erase this and just give us a moment to kind of look at these opening verses. You can go down if you wanted, but I think just even in these opening 5 verses, anything that jumps out to you or that you notice, or even maybe like, I think I notice something.
So how much of this is meant to be like poetic, just out of curiosity? If you have things like halagos, kai halagos, because it's kind of like mirrors itself. What do you call that?
Yeah, John, the way John, it seems to me, the way John writes is he likes to, I think like any really good author, but he seems to do this a lot where he likes to take an idea. So I'll just use one, light, taphos, maybe there's one here, taphos, another one, life, zoe, coming or becoming, darkness, here's another one, scotia. So anyway, he likes to do that a lot. Logos would be another one, the word, God, of course, God, beginning. This is, as this little comment up here notes, this is John retelling Genesis 1 in his own way, right? In the beginning was the Word. Well, if you go and you flip to Genesis 1, that's not quite what it says, is it? It says, in the beginning, it could be translated, in the beginning of God's creating. But John gives us like another character there. Whereas in Genesis 1, what we see is God in the Spirit, right? The Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. John introduces us to another character who was not there, so to speak, or that you might have missed. Although the moment I say that, let's just think, the Word was there, and everything, John's going to say, panta diau tua geneta, everything became through him. But where do you see the Word in Genesis 1? The Word? Can you think of that? What if I changed it from a noun to a verb? And what if I give you a hint? The light, and the darkness. Where does the Word show up in Genesis 1?
I guess you mean like as the light rather than as the word?
No, I mean, where does that show up?
Well, God speaks to
God,
create.
there it is. God speaks. He speaks his creation into existence. And so what you've got, oh gosh, this is where John blows my mind. So John, as he reads Genesis 1, he says, well, then you've got a couple of things going on. You've got God, and God speaks forth, and his speaking forth changes darkness into light. And he kind of layers this over, and what John says is, So what you've got then in the beginning is you've got God's speech with him. Like God is there with his speech. And that this speech was therefore God because it's pre-existent to anything that's not God. This is what he, Kaitheos ein halagos, and the word was God. Literally, God was the word. The word was with God. God was the word. The word was God. There's a little Greek sub-rule about why this is usually translated the other way around. But anyway, so John kind of seems to be meditating on what is going on in Genesis, that life and light, and he overlaps those things, could come out of nothingness. And that's kind of what verse 3 is all about. Everything through him became, and nothing, apart from him became nothing, not one thing which became. In some translations, or some probably Greek texts actually put a period right there. But that's a sub question we don't have to get into tonight. But like, so John has this idea that as he meditates on Genesis, like, well, wait a second, if Christ is the Son of God, and if he is a part of the Trinity, then he must have been there. Where was he? I know, the life was there, the light was there, and Christ is actually the one who brings everything into existence. Everything that's not darkness, everything that's not death, he overcomes the darkness with light. And this is kind of how he ends this initial little prologue here is, and the light in the darkness shines. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not defeat it. Darkness doesn't beat the word. And if we understand, for example, what is light in John 1? Well, light in John 1 is Zoe. Life was the light. In him was life. So then what would darkness be? Death. And so right here from the very beginning, let's switch it with what he's done with his little equation here. And the life shines out in the death, and the death did not defeat him. And so right from the beginning, John rereads Genesis 1 and goes, oh, the word has been there beating death from the very beginning. From the very beginning. So God's creation is a triumph of the word, God's reason, God's life, God's vibrancy, God, over death, darkness, evil. And he kind of piles up all these things so that in the very beginning of his gospel, before he even starts going, is you need to understand that from the very beginning, the word of God, Christ himself, he's going to say, because Christ becomes flesh, he becomes sarx down here, that from the very beginning, God has always been about beating darkness. And the Son, the Logos, has always been God's agent for defeating darkness. Isn't that crazy? It so blows my mind, but that's how John, so back to your observation, Lucas, that's how John, when he writes, he takes these ideas that he's probably, I think John was about 90 years old when he wrote this. So you can just imagine John, if he's had something like 65 years to meditate on his time with Jesus before he kind of writes this like magnum opus. And you can only imagine, wow, he has 60 years of reflection on who is Jesus? Who was this guy I followed around for all these years? And what does that mean with relationship to, again, in John's case, obviously, from the very beginning, going all the way back to Genesis? Well, it must mean he was there. So where was he there? Oh, I know. He was God's speech. When it said, God said, let there be light, that was the light of men. That was, as Jesus is going to say later, the life. Jesus is the agent of God bringing life to everything, including me, including John himself, So that's how he writes. When you read John, you can almost start like tallying certain words, dark, light, life. Famously, John has these I am statements where he, Jesus loves the metaphors. John loves to use his metaphors. I am the bread of life. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the good shepherd. I am the vine. So there's 7 of those in John's gospel, and John kind of uniquely seems to have like used those as like structuring elements for his gospel. There's just such artistry in John, but it's such a grammatically, it's a very simple book to read. I mean, relatively speaking, once you know certain like vocabulary elements, I mean, maybe the only word here, you haven't seen ponta, although that comes up in a lot of like English derivatives like pantheism or pan. I'm sure all the science words that would use it. I don't know. You haven't seen phos, but again, you have English derivatives for phos. You have choris would be the other, maybe one we don't know in some of these forms of ginomai. But anyway, the actual vocab and forms and stuff are pretty straightforward that we could read it. So anyway, so that's what struck me. I'm oftentimes the worst sermon listener because I'm like, oh, this reminds me of something else. Like, let's just flip over there and see how it's different and what tenses we're using and all those kinds of things. I'll give you one more freebie. So this is, again, one thing that was shocking to me. Luke 20, let's see here. Because you can see this, and I thought this was this was kind of shocking to me. My wife like smacked me because when I saw this, I was like, what just happened here? So let's see if we can find it. Oh, that's English. Luke 20 Greek. Okay, we'll have to use this. This is not really what I wanted, but it'll work. All right. So in Luke 20, let's see, it's earlier. Okay, so this is where Jesus tells the story of the workers who have taken over the vineyard. If you remember, and the owner of the vineyard sends servant after servant after servant, and they beat the servants, if you remember. And then he says, I'll send my son, and they'll respect my son, even though they didn't respect my servants, if you remember that story. And then kind of the scandalous bit is they kill the son, right, who the master has sent to work things out with the wicked vineyard workers. And so Jesus says, so what will he do? What will he do to them? Ti un poiesa autois hakurios tu ampelonas. What will the master of the vineyard do to them? And then he says, he will come, and we're going to actually see this form tonight. He will come and apolesai, he will destroy these farmers. Okay, oops, it's the automatic parsing. Okay, so Jesus tells this story, and this is absolutely shocking. And the Pharisees, to whom Jesus is telling this story and about whom he's telling the story, they use this really famous expression, meganoita. No way. There is no way that's what would happen. There's no way that the master would kill the people he's put in charge of the vineyard and give it to other people. And they understand this, Luke says, they understand this, pardon me, right here. Oh, that's funny. This text breaks it up for some reason. Sorry. Okay. And then the grammatais, the grammarians, the grammarians and the chief priests were seeking, they were seeking, nice infinitive, to lay upon him hands. And aute te hora, from that very hour, or in that hour. Now, this is what's really interesting to me. So this is pretty straightforward, I think, in the Greek. So they were seeking, the grammarians and the chief priests were seeking to put hands on him from that hour. And look at this. And they feared the people. So this is really interesting to me. So it says they were seeking to lay hands on him. What's that idiom mean? They were wanting to put hands on him. This is not the laying on of hands, if you know that expression in our culture.
Like seize him?
Yeah, they wanted to, capture him, seize him, arrest him, something like that. And then Luke says something really interesting. And they feared the people. They were afraid of the people. Okay. What would that maybe tell us? Why would the leaders of the Jewish religious community, why would they fear the people?
Because they would come to his defense.
Yeah, that's it. Maybe they're like, oh man, we want to try to capture this guy, but we can't capture this guy because if we do, he's a really popular teacher, right? Would there be, a riot or whatever, right? They would rebel against us. And then John has this nice little, or pardon, Luke has this gar, right? For. So they wanted to get him, right? They wanted to capture him, and they were afraid of the people. And then he says for. So that is to say, why were they afraid of the people? Which is right, because that would be what our gar is there for, right? For they knew, egnoson, this comes from gnosko, they knew that he said this parable, prosautus, against them, literally towards them, but right at them. Now, what struck me is, and so we were reading the ESV, and I went and I looked up many different translations. There are only two I found that did it right. The KJV and the New King James, and the New American Standard, NAS, the NAS. Only those two translations, sorry, I'm counting New King James as part of the Old King. Only those two translations actually translated it like this. They were seeking and they were afraid. Why were they afraid? For they knew that he spoke the parable against them. That is, I think exactly your point is, either they're afraid of the people because the people are following Jesus, and that's a problem for them because they want to capture him, but the people are going to have a problem with that if they try to capture him. Or, and I think this is what Luke's point is here with this gar here, is they were afraid of the people because they all knew, they all perceived that they were the wicked tenants in the parable. Remember, the parable is the context, right? So that is, all the Jewish people are looking around at them and going, wait a second, this teacher whom we respect and we're listening to, he just told a story and everybody gets that you're the bad guys, you're the villains in the story. And that's a problem. That's a problem. But one of the things that struck me, so we were, again, in church listening to this, and let me just pull it up right here, ESV 20. As we were listening to it, look at how this is translated. Look how they change around the conjunctions. And this is like every translation does this. So look, the scribes and the chief priests, sought to lay hands on him at that very hour. Okay? Now look, for they perceived that they had told this parable against him. Do you see now, if we move this for up, what did we just link it to? What did we just put it as a grounds to?
For the laying on of hands.
That's right. So now we've said they wanted to lay hands on it. They wanted to capture him because they were like, he said this about us. Let's get him. Does that make sense? And now look, we moved back this simple conjunction and we changed it to a but. This was shocking to me. My wife smacked me at church because I saw it and I was like, what in the world? Who's translating this thing? And I'm sure they're smarter than me, but I could not figure it out. And it makes me feel better that there are certain more kind of literalist translations that don't do this thing. Because what this says is they wanted to capture him because they were mad he told the story about him. But they didn't do that because they were afraid of the people, right? That's how this reads as far as the logical sequence. What it says, right, is they wanted to capture him and they were afraid of the people. And they were afraid of the people because they knew that he had been talking about him. Where the they is probably the people and the leaders. Everybody knows they're the bad guys of the story. And that would make sense with other things that Jesus has said in his past of like, you pile up burdens upon the people. You make their load heavy. And so if you can imagine if you're a Jewish citizen and you're going, I like this guy. This guy's saying they keep piling up things on our heads. Yes, I agree that this is a heavy teaching. They keep laying upon us burden after burden after burden. And they now realize, and Jesus has a problem with them too. He's speaking pretty explicitly, though in a parable, but pretty explicitly against them so that they all know it. Now, what's the point of that? The point of that is we don't have to be top-notch Greek scholars to see a chi and a chi. Oops, pardon me. What was it? There it is. Ironically, as I say, we don't have to be top-notch scholars to find it. Okay, to see this simple, they seek and they were afraid for progression. And to notice then in a translation, for example, here in the ESV, that they've completely changed around not only the order of the clauses, which, okay, maybe you could make an argument for that, but when they changed it, they felt that they had to change this chi to a strong contrastive but. Now, is that some kind of epic theological issue? No, like it's not like, you're not going to go, oh my word, the creed's wrong. Like, no. It's not that kind of thing. But if we can't read carefully and perceive carefully, we're not able to actually say carefully, and I very much believe in this. I very much believe that it is important as Christians to be able to carefully read the Word of God and to handle it well. And sometimes, like, again, maybe I'm really ignorant, and if you find an article, please send it to me and tell me how ignorant I am. This is going to go up on the internet, so I'm sure somebody will tell me how ignorant I am. But it's just like when you see certain things like that, it's why I really think it's important that we as a community of believers kind of go, okay, but what's in the text? What's the text say? And then we can actually argue about that. Whereas if I can't read the Greek, I don't even know what the options are, right? I don't know that we've changed the order and we've changed what clearly seems to be a straightforward chi into a strong contrastive kind of conjunction. And so that it got me it was a little hot. My wife was telling me to calm down, but I was just like, come on, man, what's going on here? And so I think we need those skills. So it's very much about our eyes. It's very much about kind of having soft eyes, which leads us to the newest lesson, the newest chapter. Okay, so we're going to add our third tense today here for lesson 12. So our tenses, remember, tenses communicate two things, right? They communicate the time when something happens, and they communicate the aspect of how something happens. So when and how. So here comes the nice little timeline. So here's our timeline. This would be now. This would be the past. This would be the later, right after now. All right. So our first tense that we learned. Anybody, what was the first tense we learned?
Present.
Present. Nice. And the present, right, happens now, and it could be like that simple present, or it could be that like ongoing present, I run or I am running, or it could even, we almost never see it translated this way, but maybe with like an amen, I do think, amen, like a truly I do say, something like that. It could be called a present emphatic. Again, it's pretty rare that we would see it translated. Sorry, that's an exclamation point. Let's try that again. Here we go. All right. So a present emphatic. So this would be like a simple present in English, what's called a present progressive in English, and what we call a present emphatic. But in the Greek, that would just be, one form. So for example, lego. I say. Amen, amen, lego. In fact, truly, truly, I do say to you. That would be maybe a good place to translate it that way. All right. The second tense we learned was?
Imperfect.
The imperfect, right? And that was happening in the past. It was an ongoing, right? Imperfectum just means not complete. Past tense, right? So it happened before now. And it was an ongoing, or it was repeated. I used to walk my dog every day, or I would go for a walk each morning or something like that. So this kind of repeated thing. And we saw that it had this augment up front with our stem. And then, oops, sorry, that was using Lego. Elegon. There we go, Elegon. All right, so I was speaking. Okay. Now, we're going to add our next tense, our third tense. And before we add that tense, we actually kind of need to step back a little bit and kind of go to our recitation. So if you remember in the recitation, there's a place where we say, what are the principal parts of luo? And we say, that's at the bottom of the second page, we say luo, luso, elusa, leluca, lelumai, eluthane. I won't write them all out because tonight and even into the next couple of weeks, we'll just be working with these first three, luo, luso, elusa, okay? So principal parts, this is something we haven't talked about because honestly, we haven't needed to. So as of now, like if I said, okay, what's that from? You know, you could look in your book, and if you wanted to, you could look up, for example, luo. And if I looked up luo, pardon me, here's what it says. In your vocab, it's just been like luo, I destroy. But when you look it up, it actually says this, luo, luso, elusa, leluca, lelumai, eluthane. I loose and destroy. I'll do another verb. Lambano, lampsamai, elabon, elepha, elemthane. Woo! So what we'll find is when you actually look up verbs, they will have multiple up to 6 of these building blocks called principal parts. And so far, all we've needed was this first principal part, right? So we had, for example, if we did it with Lego, here, I'll look up Lego since I'm on the page. Lego, arrow, oh my goodness, I almost can't even get to the third one because arrow is so weird. But Lego, arrow, apon, ereka. Okay, I'm going to pause right there. So all these forms of Lego that we saw were just built off of Lego, right? None of them yet have been built off of arrow. Not any. And you'll just have to take my word for that if you'd like. Okay, so they've all been built off this leg stem. Lego, legami, elegon, elegame, something like that. Whatever it was being built off of this leg stem. Okay. But now, as we move to our next tense, the future active and the future middle indicatives, those are all going to be built off this second principal part. So no longer are we going to build off of luo, we're going to build off of luso. We won't build off of Lego, we'll build off of arrow. We won't build off of lambano, we'll build off of lampsamai, which we'll see that in just a second, okay? So the first big so what is we're going to talk about now the future tense, the future tense. And let me just ask, when do you think the future happens?
Later.
There you go, later, that's right. And again, it could be, you know, in 2 days, it could be in 2 minutes, right? It just means after now. That's really all that means. And the different aspects of the future actually line up with the different aspects of the present. Either a simple future, I will see, a future progressive, I will be seeing. That's really clunky in English. We almost will never translate it that way. Maybe, we might say like, I will be running to the store later. You know, we might say it that way. Usually it's like, I'll run to the store. But anyway, so sometimes, and then you could even have that emphatic, I will too, you know, I will too do that homework. You know, I will too do my laundry tonight. Something like that. Some kind of emphasis kind of thing. So the when is after now, later. The how or the aspect, oh, sorry, that bothered me. I didn't put a question mark there. The how or the aspect of it is going to match up with the present. Either simple, I will go, future, I will be going, emphatic, I will indeed go. For sure, I'll go, or something like that. Okay, so that's what it communicates. Now let's talk about how to form it. And the way we're going to look at this is I'm going to pull up the most recent vocab here from lesson 12, okay? Oh, look at that. You can see my record player right there. Nice. Okay. So in the lesson 12 vocab, one thing that I would say is always kind of the hardest, at least for most people, it's one of the hardest things, is just learning your vocab. So to encourage you, I just want to point out how many of these are actually just adding a principal part to a verb that you've already seen. So for example, ginomai, I become. The second principal part of ginomai is ginesomai. So if you looked it up in the back of your book, which you could, they'd give you all the forms, but they're just adding one for us. So ginomai, ginesomai. Here's another one. So that's a second principal part. Here's another one. Nosomai. Oh, that's a deponent future for ginosko. Okay, so that's the second part, principal part. Ginosko, gnosomai. Another second principal part, diduxo. I will teach. What verb do you think this is the second principal part of?
Didusco.
Good, didusco. Okay, so, and we're going to go into kind of how this is formed in just a second. Hadidaskalas, no. Okay, here's one. Duxa, oh no, sorry. That'll become duxaso. Okay, elusomai, here's another one. Erkomai becomes elusomai. So there's another second principal part. Erkomai, elusomai. Thalmazo, that's just a new verb. Let's see. Oh, lamesomai, there we go. The deponent future of lumbuno, lamesomai. And I think that's it. Yeah, okay. So 5 of these are just, man, these are weird future forms. These are weird forms. You're just going to have to memorize those principal parts. Okay. Now, what I would encourage you to do, we're kind of at that point. We're not there quite yet. Maybe in the next chapters where we'll add the third principal part. We're kind of at that point where we're getting close to it being worth it. And I'll send you a resource that can help you. But it's kind of getting worth it to say, okay, I'm going to have to memorize these principal parts. You're not there yet. You could totally make it through this kind of like Greek 1 class and not memorize those principal parts. But you'll see, especially for verbs like erkomai, very common verbs. It's like, okay, I probably need to learn some of these. For the most common verb forms, Lego is another one. You see the aorist third principal part, apen, or forms of apen all the time. They're just all over the place. As you can imagine with a verb like I say, yeah, it's probably coming up a lot. Okay, so if it's not one of those weird forms though, so how do we form it? Well, let's look at luo as our example. Luo, luso. What do you notice is the difference? Sorry, this is so sloppy. Let's just read that. What's the difference between luo and luso? Sigma, that's it. So this sigma, what we're going to see is this sigma is the tense sign, the tense indicator of the future active and middle indicative. So to form the future, really what we're going to do is we're going to take, we're going to see our stem. We're going to add on to that a sigma, and then we're going to have our normal active, the same exact endings for the present active and the the present middle passive. So for example, we'd see luso, luces, luce, lusamen, lusate, lususi. So the same exact endings. Lu didn't change. We just added this sigma. That would be the future active indicative. For the future middle indicative, same thing. We would have our lu plus our sigma plus those same ones. Lusamai, luce, lusatai, lusamatha, lusastha, lusantai. Okay, so the exact same. We're not learning any new endings. These are the exact same endings as the present. Okay, the only thing that changed is we added this sigma in, and you can kind of see that if you look at your vocab and you see like deduxo would be a good example of this. So it was, as you said, it was didusco, and then the second principal part was deduxo. What? Deduxo? Where'd that come from? Where did this C come from? and we had to kind of do our little bit of math, right? So we had a sigma plus a kappa, which says sk, plus another sigma. So it became sks, which sounds not too different from a xi. Does that kind of make sense? Kind of hear like, oh, okay, that's where that would come from. And so just like with the imperfect, we had to learn that like augment vowel math, right? Where if we had, for example, if we had an epsilon and we added that epsilon, that gave us an eta, right? Here, what we're going to see is consonant math, if I can put it that way. If I have, for example, is it okay if I erase this? I feel like it clutters up. Okay. This is like I'm not much of an OCD person, but you get enough stuff going on a whiteboard, it overwhelms me. Okay, so take a verb like, for example, I send, pempo. So to take pempo and put it into the future, I'm just gonna add a sigma. Now, where would I add that sigma? Like, do I add it up front? Do I add it at the end? Where do I add it? And we can use that example, right? Luo, luso. Where do I add the sigma?
The sigma goes right before the ending at the end of the stem.
Okay, good. So then I would have, if that's true, right, then I'm going to add a sigma right here. So say what that's going to sound like.
Pempso. So you replace it with psi.
There you go. That's exactly it, right? So it kind of makes sense, right? Okay, so I've got a ps plus a s. So that's going to become pempso. And so there's this, vowel math, consonant math, for lack of a better word. Maybe there's a technical word. I don't know what it is. And so I want to give us just kind of a basic, pempo is one good example of this, but just kind of a basic, like, how does this work? And if you want it in the book, it's on page 66. So you have a couple of different categories of where these consonants kind of work in your mouth and how they work, and that's kind of cool. If you like language and kind of linguistic-y kind of stuff, you could check that out. It just talks about where it stops, and then does it stop with a voice or without a voice? So like p versus b, and those are two examples of what are called labials. That is to say, it stops on the lips. So p, and you can do that. You can mute yourself and do that if you want, but just make that sound p versus b. Kind of go, oh yeah, I could see, and then f, and they're all involving our lips. So this is something you could have fun with, of like, oh yeah, where am I touching? And this is something like speech therapists try to get kids to think about if they struggle with certain pronunciation, is involving their mouth. Anyway, a couple different categories. So we have this category where you have a couple of labial stops. We have a P, a beta, and a phi. And when those usually, not always, but usually those will result in a psi. So, and that kind of makes sense if you think of bups, ps, ps, and you're like, okay, I can see kind of how that would work. Or psi, ps, okay, all right, now I can get that up, psi. So those are called labial stops. Those stop on the lips. Then you have palatal stops. Those stop, so k. And if you think of, so you can make a kappa, k, g, and just think about where you're using your mouth. What's your tongue doing? What's your breath doing? But you'll see like, oh, okay, those are stopping on your palate. They're stopping on your tongue, and usually on the back of your tongue, not into a guttural, which is like down in your throat. But anyway, they're stopping in the back of your mouth, or the lip plus the top of the mouth. So your kappa, your gamma, and your ki. And when you add a s to those, right, a sigma to those, ks, 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 and that's going to give us what we already saw with didusco, that gave us a xi, which again kind of makes sense that we would have a xi there, like ks. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, and then the last one are our dental stops. Dental involves our teeth. So da, 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 ta, and th. So that one, th is kind of cool. So if you say th, theta, notice where your tongue goes. So like if you did that, sorry, this is the dork in me coming out. I love this stuff. So anyway, the t and the d in the duh and the th. Do you notice how your tongue goes between your teeth for your theta? Can you kind of see that? Versus a t, where it just kind of touches the back of your teeth. So this is the kind of stuff that happens. And again, not my specialty, but I find it really interesting. So anyway, when you have these dentals, what happens with dentals is they'll drop completely. So you'll just have the sigma. And, or zzz, or and you can just kind of imagine like, oh, okay, I could see how that kind of just like, hey, we're just not going to get along together. We're not going to be able to join up to make a different consonant or whatever. We're just going to have to get out of here. Okay, so that's what's going on there. And you can see some examples of that on that bottom of page 66. So pempo, one that we saw, pempo becoming pempso, blepo becoming blepso, gruffo becoming grupso, arcomi becoming arcsomi, uggo becoming uxo. So there was your gumma, uggo becoming uxo. So just like with our augment, where we kind of had to be on the lookout, like, hey, with our augment, right, it could show up between a prefix and the root word, right? So it could show up right here. We have to be on the lookout. Similarly, with these sigma tense signs, we're going to have to be on the lookout before our ending, not just for a sigma, which it could just be the sigma, like luo becoming luso, but we're going to have to be on the lookout for, wait a second, that is pempo. That is pempso now. Something happened here. And right now, we really just have this one tense sign, right? So we're going to go, oh, that's probably going to be a sigma from the future tense coming in. That's what's going on. Okay. Let me pause there for a second. Can I clarify that? Does that kind of make sense? Questions?
No questions.
It's all right? Okay.
No questions. Mm-mm.
Okay. Well, let's do this then. Since I wasn't sure exactly how far we get, let's open, and I'm going to take a picture of it. It's amazing technology on this. So I'm going to take a picture of the exercises from lesson 12, and let's kind of look at it. And I want to just do one thing specifically is I want to focus on like verb finding. I want to try to find what's the verb that we've got, going on. What's the verb tense that we've got going on? So we're going to look for our augments. We're going to look for our sigmas. Let me share this here real quick. Okay. All right. Now, I know this can be kind of tricky because some of it is brand new vocab. So I'll kind of help with that if the vocab gets a little wonky. Okay. But number one comes, our first verb, it's our first word. It comes from the verb thalmadzo. Thalmadzo. All right. So what we've got here is ethalmadzamen. Ethalmadzamen. What do you notice about it if it comes from thalmadzo?
So it has an eta augment, which means it's imperfect.
Good. Just one slight thing. So it's not an eta.
It's an epsilon.
Epsilon. Good. Excellent. So we've got an epsilon augment. That means it's an imperfect. You're exactly right. And then this amen, what does that tell me?
Plural. Singular or first.
First person.
Good. And is it active or middle passive?
Oh, middle passive.
Okay. So where was that ending again?
I don't know.
Like amen ete usi, is that what you're getting at?
Okay, but except for this is in the imperfect. Now the
Right.
imperfect has slightly different endings. If you want to look them up in the book, it's on the third page, I think, of our recitation. It's on page 54 in the book. Or probably 54. Oh, sorry, that's 54. Yeah. And the middle passives are on page 59.
Mm-hmm.
So the actives are eluon, elus, elue, eluamen, eluete, eluon. So is it one of those? on esse, amen, ete, on.
Amen.
It is amen. Good. So this would be an imperfect, active indicative, first person plural. Good. We were marveling. We were being amazed, you know, and it almost can sound passive-y, but anyway, we were marveling. We were blown away. Here's another one. Who mayst thou mustest thou. Thou mustest thou. Hold on, let me zoom in a little bit. I don't know if you can see that very well. There we go. That's a little better. Okay. Thou mustest that. Thou mustest that comes from thaumadzo. Thou mustest that. What's that?
Second person plural.
Okay. Second person plural. Good. And we've got that nice emphatic humes right there, right? So I've got a second person plural ending. Do I have an augment? No augment. Do I have a sigma, a tense sign of the future? I do, right? So, and then look what's happened. Our zeta has completely dropped out. It's been, you know, kicked out of there by that sigma. That's one of those dental stops that's just like, hey, you know, you got to head on out of here. It's in that zeta. And again, you can make it with your teeth if you want to feel where that comes from. But so this will be a future, right? You all will marvel. You also, with this nice emphatic chi day. And you also will marvel.
So real quick, the list then wasn't comprehensive. It's just, those are examples for like the dental stop?
Yeah, those are examples of what happens. And so, yeah, it's just more being aware. So the way I would kind of think of it is, okay, so we could have, a psi, right? I could have a xi, or I could have a drop completely, right? And just have a sigma.
Okay.
So that's what we've got here, is thaumadzo becoming thaumasso. Okay. All right, let's look at the verb in number 2. Well, first, let's see. Can you find the first verb in number 2?
Eginoskamen.
Okay, eginoskamen. Good. All right. So what's it come from? And notice, this is kind of funny. Often when we parse, we say this last, but we really have to know what's it come from.
Ginosko, I know.
Okay, comes from ginosko. Okay. Oops, as I dot my iota. Oh my goodness. Ginosko. Okay, so it comes from ginosko. Do we see an augment? Do we see a sigma?
Augment.
We see an augment. Good. So we've got this and so far for us, that'll change in a couple weeks, but so far, if I see an augment, that means it's an imperfect. And is this an imperfect active, on, esse, amen, ete, on, or a middle passive, amen, u, eta, ametha, este, anta?
Active.
This is an active. Good. So we've got an imperfect active indicative, first person plural. Let's see, another, good, okay. Our other verb, and I'll hide, is elucita. Elucita. Now this is that separate strange category where we have to look at our new vocabulary. And this is what it says. Elucimai, what is the form? I will come. It's the deponent future of erkamai. So they're telling you that the second principal part of erkamai is elucimai. And this is one of these tricky ones that we just, oh man, this is a verb that just looks totally different. You know, it's just completely changed around, a pretty radical stem change, but there it is. And it's a deponent. And does anybody remember, what does that mean when it's deponent?
It looks imperfect, but it translates active.
Oh, very close. Not looks imperfect.
Passive.
Good. Yeah, looks middle or passive, but translates actively. Good. You're exactly right. So this I, right? It's not a true actual passive like, I was hit. It looks passive, but it's actually going to function actively. So that's what we've got here. This is a future. It's built off the second principal part. So just to reiterate that, some verbs, like for example, thou mustest that, we'll be able to spot, oh, there's that sigma. There it is. I see that. Some verbs like erchomai, elucimai, I'm going to have to know those principal parts. I'm going to have to go, that's not even off of erchomai. That's off this second principal part. And the thing, the tense, the only tense we build off of the second principal part is the future active and the future middle indicative, okay? So when it's built off the second part, I know what it is, okay? And we do have one more verb in this sentence. Can anyone find it?
Annoy.
Yeah. Okay, good. It's this one. Anoixe. Anoixe. Do you know what that's from?
Anoigo, I open.
Good. It is from Anoigo, I open. Awesome. Okay. So it's from Anoigo. And again, you don't have to ask these questions this way. I'm just a big fan of like Lego instructions. Like ask me this and then do this and this. So do we have an augment? Has something happened up front with Anoixe? Nope. Do we have a sigma? Has something happened before our ending on Anoigo? Yes, it has, right? So there it is. So g became xa. Oops. G became xa. So there we go. So we've got a future. And now we can say, okay, so this is a future. There's my sigma right there. It's gotten swallowed up in, or it's made a C. And then what's my ending then?
A.
Good, A. And so what is this? Can we parse it?
He will open.
Good. And yeah, so that was a translation, and that's a skill too. Could you parse it? You translated it perfectly. So tense, is it present, imperfect, or future?
Future.
Future. And is it active or middle? Since it's future, that's the only two options so far.
Active.
Good. And it's indicative because all of our verbs so far are indicative. And then person and number?
Third person singular.
Awesome. There you go. Third person singular. Okay. So that's what it is as far as kind of how we look at it. This is just that geeky part of me. Like I love looking, I love looking for these like principal parts and the augments and the and again just for fun. We don't have one of these in John, but I'll go back. Actually, sorry. Let's see. Did I close it? I'll go back and we'll kind of look here, see what we can find. Actually, let me go back to John. Not that we had a future, pardon me, but just to go back to these forms. So egenita is from our verb ginomai. Listen to the principal parts of it and see if you can hear where in ginomai, where does that come from? All right, here it is. Ginomai, ginesomai, egenamein, gegana, gegenemai, egenathane. Where do you think that came from?
Maybe the third part?
It is from the third part. Good. So a couple of skills, and this is probably the main skill, and it can kind of be lost in this lesson. But the main skill or the main new idea, we've kind of already seen the augment thing, and that's important. So that's the skill, that's the linguistic skill of looking for what are called tense signs. They're little things that we add. So for example, we could add an augment up front, or in this case, right, we could add the sigma before our ending. This is a kind of a different verb skill where really what we're doing, and again, it can kind of be lost because of how normal the future is in some of the verb forms. But really the new skill is, we're learning about what are called principal parts. What do I build off of? And that idea is really going to get expanded on in the next lesson. And that is actually where this verb egenita comes from. It's built off the third principal part. Whereas the future, kind of as we've already seen, The future is built off of a relatively stable second principal part. Luo, luso. Blepo, blepso. Ugo, uxo. Like, okay, that's pretty normal. Some are weird. Erchomai, elusomai. Oh, lambano, lampsomai. Oh, so some are weird, but most verbs are relatively stable in those first two parts. But we don't want to lose kind of focus, or we don't want to lose the idea that what we're really doing is we're looking for, is this built off my first principal part, lu, or is it built off my second principal part, loose? Because next chapter, we're going to see, oh, we're going to build off the third principal part, and we're going to build a new tense off of it. Okay? All right. And I'm going to post this video like tonight. And because Veritas actually went virtual for the week that I was teaching this lesson, I've already got the answer key done for lesson 12. So I'm going to post that tonight too, just to make up for all my many, many late posting sins. So there you go. Oh, wait, that's not how you make up for sins. Okay, anyway, so that's it. I will see you guys. Thank you for participating, and we'll check in a couple weeks.
Thanks, John.
You're welcome.
Thanks. See you next time.
See ya. Bye-bye.